Hello, good evening. Welcome to My IVF Fences. We are back after a summer break, and I hope you are all well and are ready to educate and learn a little bit more, but also find some useful tips from Alan Thornhill, who is our speaker today. Hi, Alan. Welcome back. Glad that we are back here. Last time we we had a chance to see you. It was back in July. So I'm glad that we are here and you are having I hope you are having a good day so far, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting session. I know that you have prepared some tips, useful tips, I'm sure, again, and are ready to share those with our audience today, right?
Yep, thanks, Caroline. I'm glad to be the first one of the new school in session. The
True.
after summer holidays sessions. So yeah, very excited
True,
to
it's
be here.
our first one, so I'm glad that we are here, and I hope you had a good break and now are ready to ask some questions as well. Because as you know, we will start with Alan's presentation on our topic, so how to choose the right clinic for you. But afterwards, there will be time for your questions, so don't hesitate. Alan is right here for you, and I'm sure he'll be happy to share his experience, his knowledge. And if you had a chance to see some previous webinars with Alan, you know that it's going to be an interesting session. I'm sure of it. So I think that it's good to start. I don't want to take it any longer. I'm really looking forward to what you have prepared. Let us know that that all is clear and you can hear us. And I think we can begin. Alan, ready to share
Yep.
your screen as well?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline.
Brilliant.
I know our usual trick is that if we have any problems, you'll jump in or you'll send me a text.
Definitely.
Or something, okay?
I'm right here, but right now
Perfect.
everything is working perfectly.
Yep.
I'm sure it's going to be
So,
all okay.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen then. Okay, here we go. And that should be full screen now. Yep, you can see that?
Yeah, everything is perfect. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. It's great to be back, as I said. And this is about trying to choose the right clinic for your treatment. And I've got this big thing about not saying best clinic, why the best one may not be the right one for you. And we'll cover that, but we'll talk a lot about different parameters and different things to think about when choosing a clinic. But I want to get that message across to you that we, perhaps should stop using the word best, because I think it's very, very loaded statement. So briefly, the agenda. I like doing this bad news, good news thing. I don't know why. It's just a little thing that I do. So forgive me for that. I suppose it's to try and put you in a state of saying, life isn't perfect, but there's a bright part to it. There's a silver lining to the cloud. So we'll cover the right versus the best clinic. And remember that the person at the center of this is you. This is about you. It's not about the average person. It's specifically about you. A little bit about myself I'll cover, just to try and put some stuff in context. Why would you bother to listen to me? And then most of it is, tips from an IVF insider. So stuff that I've learned over the years in all my different roles to try and help you make that decision about choosing the right clinic for you. A few resources. There are many, many resources out there. I've chosen just a few. It's not an exhaustive list. And some next steps. So sorry about the bad news. That's how I often start these sort of talks. None of this is going to be a surprise to you, I don't think. IVF can be very expensive. And this is relevant because we're going to talk a little bit about costs at different clinics, not specific clinics, but just general comments. And most people will need several cycles to be successful, if they're lucky enough to be successful. So that's one of the other reasons why IVF can get expensive. Clinics are getting busier. I said this in you're going to see some overlap. If any of you attended my coaching tips webinar, you're going to see some overlap. And that's because one of the main questions that people ask, or one of the main topics that I deal with when I'm coaching people, is about their choice of clinic. So a lot of the things you'll see have been said before, but clinics are getting busier, and that makes it very relevant when you're trying to choose a clinic that's right for you. So it might have great headline success rates, for example, but there might be things that aren't so apparent when you look at the website. Another thing that I think it's important for you to know is that, it sounds a very corporate thing, but it is relevant to the topic of how to choose the right clinic for you. And that's that the industry, let's call it what it is, the IVF industry is undergoing a lot of consolidation, meaning there are fewer sort of independent private clinics. And this is across the globe, but You'll particularly see it in the UK, across Europe, in the US, Australia, and acquisition of clinics. So the buying up of clinics, all these private clinics, what were sort of almost like family-run clinics or run by a particular doctor. Those are being acquired by private investment groups, and that trend is growing. Now, I'm not here to say that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it does have implications for your choice of clinic. The best clinic, as I said right at the beginning, might not be the right one for you, and I'll give you some examples as we go through. And there may not be a perfect clinic for all people, because we don't live in a perfect world, and I've got a slide to tell you about that, which is a little bit disappointing, but it's reality. And that's what I do, is I try and give you a dose of reality. To find the right clinic, so that's our goal today, to find the right clinic is going to require some work. And I say some work, that it's not hardly any work, it's quite a lot of work, unfortunately. And if you're prepared to do that, then you may end up getting to the right clinic. The good news is that there are many IVF clinics and they're accessible in most countries. And although I often give a talk that might be a bit Eurocentric or even a bit UK-centric, because that's where I have a lot of experience and a lot of examples to share with you, the reality is I know that this webinar can be viewed, obviously it's digital, it can be viewed all over the world. And I'm currently working with a couple from Asia. So, these webinars really do have a global reach. And I hope that the message is relevant globally, even though there's some specific regional examples. Success rates are improving and more treatment options are available. So this is all good news. Regulation, which sometimes is considered a bad thing, when we think that different areas of our lives are being over-regulated, and professional bodies can keep clinics honest. So I'm going to argue in a way that sometimes this is a good thing, particularly in something, an area of medicine like IVF, which is relatively new. Maybe having regulation and professional bodies to keep an eye on things is actually quite a good thing, that it protects you, the patient. And I've said this before, most clinic staff really do want the best for patients. So at the individual staff level, you can be pretty sure that most people are rooting for you. But at the clinic level, maybe the picture's slightly different, because there might be different outcomes, different metrics that show whether that clinic's successful for those private investors, for example. Funding and financing is available, so that's good. That means that this expensive thing that you might have to do, unfortunately, might be more within your grasp than it was in the past. But if you can get funding, that's great. And there are a number of countries where funding is available, so that's good news. But I do have a slide about that, a sort of buyer beware type slide, because getting something free is definitely good, and who wouldn't want something free, but it comes with some strings attached often. And there's definitely more focus now on patient well-being and, surprise, surprise, fertility coaching. So these are all good things. So a little bit about who I am. I'm a registered clinical scientist specializing in embryology. So I was a bench embryologist for a number of years, and I've been doing this job or something like this job for over 25 years. So I've seen a lot, I've seen a lot of the evolution of IVF, from making your own media to this consolidation of clinics. There's been a lot of change over the last 25 years. I've got a number of publications. I'm a published author in this field, which means I keep on top of the field. And that's important, because someone asked me in the last webinar, how do you stay on top of all these new things? And I'm pretty honest, transparent sort of guy. I don't know everything about everything, but I've got my fingers in lots of pies, and I know who to ask if something new comes up. I've had clinical, commercial, academic, and regulatory roles in IVF. I've actually worked for the UK regulator, the HPA, in the past. So I've got a kind of rounded view of things. I can understand why sometimes people say things a certain way, because they have an agenda. We all have an agenda. We all have a bias. But it's important to be aware that people have bias. So even I have bias as well. But fortunately, from this rounded set of different jobs all around the area of IVF and reproduction, means I can maybe take a more balanced view of things. Global perspective, although I've worked in the UK a lot, I've also worked in the UK, and I've had roles in industry that have taken me to all parts of the globe. So I've got a good idea about what's happening in other countries. And I think the key thing is, and this is why I think people like getting a fertility coach, is if they like it if someone's an insider. And so I'm an insider on the industry, so I kind of know why things are done in clinics. But I do have an independent, objective, outside view, because I'm not going through that treatment. I'm not doing it as you, I'm doing it with you. I'm sort of holding your hand, I'm standing to the side. So it's objective and it's independent. and it's an outsider's view. I've been involved in the fertility journeys of thousands of patients, either as a practitioner or in my various roles. So I've kind of seen a lot of different things. So you could surprise me with something new, but I've probably heard about it before. Does that mean I've got the answer? Not necessarily. That's what coaching is all about. It's trying to get the answer out of you. And I've been offering coaching to patients because I wanted to sort of give back. I mean, I'm working in industry means that you're often in a very technical area, and you can be very, very far away from the patients, which, when I first got into IVF and clinical embryology, I was literally every day speaking to patients. So I think that's something I really miss. And if you speak to embryologists these days, many of them are feeling that same sort of loss. So why would you work with a fertility coach? Well, kind of covered it by talking about what I currently do. An independent sounding board to help you with advice and help you with decision making, not to make the decision for you and not to tell you what to do, but to be independent. That insider knowledge, that external perspective, and help in setting boundaries, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, and making decisions, because often people come to me and they say, well, look, we're about to do this. And I go, look, I'm not going to make the decision for you, but let's talk about, what factors you're considering to help you make that decision. And of course, that's super relevant when we're talking about choosing a clinic, because that is one of the biggest decisions you'll make as part of your IVF journey. I can help save money, and I've got loads of examples of that. Most people say it's very empowering to have someone kind of giving them permission to ask questions, help them to choose the right questions, all that sort of stuff. And that means regaining a little bit of control. And of course, everybody knows going through, in fact, any kind of treatment, not just IVF, that you're at the mercy of somebody else. Your life becomes a little bit medicalized and you lose control. And this is one way to regain at least some of the control. So that's why you might work with a fertility coach. So I told you I was going to give you another piece of sort of bad news, how to find the perfect clinic in an imperfect world. Well, let's imagine for a second, what if every IVF clinic around the world, not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but around the world, offered the same menu of treatment options? So everything, PGTA, ICSI, donor eggs, all of that stuff. The same experience of their staff. The doctors were all super experienced, so were the nurses, so were the embryologists, in fact, the entire team, all the support staff as well. They had the same pricing, they had identical success rates, and they complied with the same regulations and laws. So you could get the same type of treatment in one country as you could in another. Well, wouldn't that be great? That would be the perfect clinic. That would be the perfect world. And I could go on and on about what these things could be. But I think you all know that this doesn't exist, because all the things I've said vary greatly. They even vary within the same town. So the chance of really having this kind of level playing field, it's really not there. So it makes your job very difficult in choosing a clinic. So let's cover a little bit more about the right versus best, because I've told you before, this is something really important to me, because people do say the word best a lot. Best is usually considered as the clinic with the highest success rate. I know that's not necessarily the same for everybody, but that's usually what people mean when they say the best clinic. But what about location, age group, treatment type and flexibility of treatment, cost, patient well-being? All of these things are all things that I know, because I've worked with you, meaning you as a group, on these things. These things are all really important to you. So you can't dismiss them and just say, oh, well, I'm only interested in success rates. And this is going to seem like a strange image to put up, but I got it from a coaching book that I was reading recently. It's this idea that, a cactus thrives in the desert, but it doesn't thrive in other environments. Similarly, a tropical plant wouldn't thrive in the desert. So it's about sort of saying you're unique, you're individual, and you have to find the right environment for you. And that means addressing your specific needs. So you're not just an IVF patient who needs a set of procedures to be done. You're somebody who has lots of different needs, and they're not just about getting you through a process and getting a success rate. So I'm not calling any of you a cactus, by the way, it's just a metaphor. So if we talk about choosing the right clinic and treatment, what are some of the things we're going to think about? And that little silly image on the right is this consideration of IVF clinics being a bit of a funnel. When you approach one, it's quite easy to fall into the funnel and find it difficult to get out again. So it's really important that you do your homework before you fall into that funnel. And I've met a lot of people who've fallen into the funnel. I'm not saying the clinic they've gone to is bad. It's just that they haven't done the homework to ask all the questions that are important to them before they made that choice, before they signed on dotted line, before they swipe their credit card. So right or best comes up again. What are the trusted resources that help you make that choice about the right clinic and the right type of treatment for you? Should you consider UK or overseas? That's, I'm being UK centric here, but you could use that concept for wherever you are in the world. Should you choose the place where you live, or should you travel to get treatment? Ratings, customer ratings. I'm saying TripAdvisor. I don't know if there is necessarily a TripAdvisor for IVF clinics, but you're all familiar with the concept of TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor versus facts. So what do ratings actually tell us versus the facts about a particular clinic? We do need to cover understanding results, because they are, although I said they're not the only thing to consider, results, by the way, I mean success rates, but they are really important. Nobody would go to a clinic that had 0 success rate, but gave great coffee and was really friendly. Be pointless. And compliance, and this might be a bit of a new word to you. I don't mean you don't understand the word, but you might not be thinking about that when you're thinking about a clinic giving you treatment. And as I've said already, you are going to have to do some homework. And 2 of the pieces of homework that I'm going to send you away with today, if you haven't made a decision, or if you're wondering about whether you should be sticking with the clinic you're already with, is creating a wish list and thinking about your boundaries. And we'll cover that. And I think it's really important, just like you would with quite a lot of other products and services today, try before you buy. And these things are all available at many, many clinics. And a lot of people I speak to have already done this. But I think it's really important to visit or have a free virtual consult, because it can tell you quite a lot, and you can ask quite a lot of questions about your future treatment. So don't treat it like it's a pitch to you, like someone's just giving you a sales pitch and you just have to sit there and listen. Actually take the opportunity to ask questions. So where should I search, and who should I ask to find the right clinic? Because this is one of the first things you're going to think about if you're having some treatment, is you're going to say, well, what next? What should I do? And of course, one of the first things you'll just probably reach out to people friends and family. There's nothing wrong with this, but you do have to remember that they'll have a very specific, potentially very biased, very limited opinion. Because if they haven't been through treatment, then they literally potentially know nothing apart from what they've read. If they've been through once and failed, they might have a negative opinion. If they've been through successfully, they might have a slightly biased in a positive direction opinion. So I don't need to go on about this, but you can see the limitations of speaking to friends and family. By all means, use them for support, but they might not be the right people to help you make a decision, except for maybe doing some research for you. Bulletin boards, nothing wrong with these. Again, super important for support and perhaps signposting you towards more information, but not necessarily the place to get the right information for you about which clinic you should go to, because you're going to see a lot of potentially biased information. I don't mean biased in a negative way. I just mean in a factual way. Somebody will be biased because of their experience, and that's not necessarily what you need to hear. And then our good old friend Google, and I showed this in the coaching webinar, but it's completely relevant for this one, because it's about trying to choose the right clinic. Now here I did something specific. I on 3 separate occasions, I asked Google the question, I didn't ask a question, I just put the search terms in, best IVF clinic London, because I think that's the sort of search term that somebody would probably do if they lived in London and wanted to do IVF. So in May of 2022, I found the London Acupuncture Clinic. That was the top hit on Google. Well, no offense to the London Acupuncture Clinic, and I know that they support people going through IVF, but it doesn't provide IVF treatment. So that's a bit of a red herring. That could lead you down the wrong path, waste some time and energy. Then on 28th of November, I find Lister Fertility Clinic. I know this clinic, it's a good clinic. I've visited there, I know the people there. That's great, but is it, and I'm not saying it's not the best, but because it came up top of the search terms, you might think that by some validated methodology, it's the best clinic in London. Well, is it the best clinic on that day, or no, it's just search engine optimization. So again, no offense to the Lister Clinic. It's just a case of, is that really helping you make the decision about the best clinic? And then finally, I look only a couple of weeks later, I look on the 8th of December, and I find the London Doctors Clinic. Well, I'm not even sure, well, they probably have something to do with IVF, but they don't offer IVF. So you can see that doing a Google search was not necessarily helpful. You could argue that I used the wrong search terms, but either way, it's not very helpful. It's not very user-friendly. So let's get on to some trusted resources. Now, I wish I could say to you, there's an ideal method and there's an ideal set of trusted resources. And I'm afraid I'm going to say there isn't at the moment, but these are the next best thing I would say. So I would start, whatever country you're in, with a national registry. They can be tricky to navigate because they're not usually set up to be patient-friendly. Maybe a little exception would be the UK's HPA one, although I would argue it's not that patient-friendly. But other ones, the US one is very technical, the Australian one is very technical, but I've put them in anyway, and they're in the resources section at the end as well. Now, I'd say these are really good because they contain validated and verified data. Now, I'm using these more for success rates than anything else because they won't tell you a lot about, or they won't necessarily tell you a lot about the other features of the clinic. The HVA one does, but not all the others will. But my point here really is it's validated, verified data. So it's kind of independent and it's being checked. Then we go on to something like an international, independent, curated resource. So I hope all those terms kind of make sense to you. You know, international, it covers more than one country. Independent, it's not looking after one particular clinic, so it's not biased in that way. But curated is good, but it also means that somebody has selected information. I'm not saying they've done it in a bad way, but it does mean that it's not completely objective information. It's been selectively curated. And so, for example, there's a great, I put a link in there for treatment options abroad. And I think this is probably the next best thing beyond national registries. But part of that curation is combining reviews from multiple sources. That may or may not be a good thing. Again, I'm not judging it to be a bad thing. I'm just saying, you know, in science, often we don't combine data sets unless we're absolutely sure that they're equivalent. And combining different types of reviews may or may not be a good thing. And then finally, we have things like local, independent, patient-led resources. And I think that's the future. And I'm going to do a little shout out for a organization that's recently started called Fertility Mapper. The downside is it needs more reviews, but the upside is it's completely patient-led in terms of the review. So as long as enough people give their reviews, you know they're going to be very independent. They could be biased. They could be biased from patients who have either a good or a bad outcome, but at least they're not curated by somebody else who might have a different agenda. So I think I'm trying to make the point that there is nothing perfect at the moment, and that does make your job a little bit harder, but at least there's some signposts of places to look. So you've often heard this about house buying. Well, it's not so different when you're talking about treatment either. Location, location, location. So where are you going to think about having your treatment? And then there may be many factors that will dictate where you think about having treatment. But you could be thinking about being treated locally, which would make sense. Again, in the perfect world, unless you wanted to go to Australia and you lived in the UK, why wouldn't you want to be treated down the road, your local hospital or your local IVF clinic? So I guess that would be the ideal if we lived in a perfect world. But sometimes you have to go further afield. You have to go to another clinic in your country, national, or sometimes you have to go international. And international might be for lots of different reasons. Could be cost, could be availability of treatment types that aren't available locally or nationally. It could be the local laws and regulations that differ, and maybe the thing that you need isn't allowed in a particular country. It could be language. You know, wherever you're living, you might speak in a different native tongue, and with something as sensitive and that makes you as vulnerable as IVF treatment, you might want to be having that with in a country or with a doctor who's speaking your native language. And cultural differences as well. So all of these things can affect where you might consider to have your treatment. Obviously, the fact that you might need to travel if you go either nationally or internationally can be a big deal, and it can be very different for different people. If you've got a disability, for example, travel becomes much more difficult. So that could have a big impact on the amount of money you need to spend, the time you might need to spend. If you're traveling internationally, you're almost certainly going to have to take, a week or two off if you're the female going through the treatment. And energy, it's just energy sapping having to travel for anything. I know, because I used to do that a lot for my job. Is funding available? Obviously, that generally wouldn't be international, but locally or nationally. So in some countries, it used to be the case in the UK that you could only get treated, more local to you. I think that's changed now. But, these are all things to consider. So if you do want to access funding, that's going to impact where and how far you travel. So let's talk a little bit about the funding element. So let's say you live in a country and you're lucky enough that offers free IVF, or at least part free IVF. Then I think you need to consider very carefully actually, whether you're going completely private or you're accessing some funded treatment, investing wisely, because it's not just about money, it's also your time. Because if you go down a rabbit hole or get the wrong kind of treatment, or you're not happy, or you have to wait too long, this can all impact your ultimate success rate and your state of mind as well. So public is often considered free, funded, or at least subsidized. There are a number of countries now which will subsidize it on top of your insurance policy, for example. Private generally might offer more treatment options, because public usually requires there to be a lot of quite high quality evidence suggesting that a certain treatment option should be available. It's not always down to evidence, it's sometimes just the local laws and regulations. But private clinics may have more flexibility about offering treatment options. And that's a double-edged sword, as I'll say in a second. A plus, public might be part of a hospital. A lot of private IVF clinics are very much standalone. Now, should some incident happen, some medical incident, then being part of a hospital might be more beneficial to you, because you have access to that kind of care immediately rather than having to be shipped off there. I mean, those are rare events, but there's still something to consider. Public, as I suggested at the beginning, might have a long waiting list, and certainly post-COVID in this country, at least, some of the NHS centres had very long waiting lists. And I've spoken to a number of patients who weren't really aware of that and were very disappointed to find that they were on a long waiting list and waiting for that funded treatment. And they probably would have gone private had they been aware of that. And private, well, almost certainly going to be more costly than public, but that's not just because we think of private as being more expensive. It can be a number of different reasons. One, because public tends to do their non-funded treatment cycles, let's call them, so private in inverted commas, at a very kind of economic kind of rate. And also they don't offer all the treatment options, the so-called add-ons. So you might find yourself with a much smaller bill if you go to a public hospital, even if you pay for it yourself, than if you went to a private centre. So those are all things just to consider. And here's the first bit of homework that I would give anybody who's either in treatment failed treatment and thinking about a new clinic, or hasn't started treatment yet and is thinking about a clinic. I would really start with your wish list and red lines. So what do I mean by that? Well, wish list is kind of obvious. Actually think what would be the perfect clinic for you. I mean, don't go crazy. I mean, there's only so much good quality coffee that they're going to provide, and red carpets and sofas and so on. But you know what I really mean. I mean, what is it that you want from that clinic? List your priorities and rank them. Some examples might be location, success rates, cost. I've put them in a random order because it's for you to rank them. I don't want you to think that I think one thing's more important than the others. Timelines, when's treatment can be available, what your timelines are. Is there a supportive environment? And then let's do some red lines. What I mean by red lines are things that you really don't want to compromise on. So it's not just what you want, it's almost like what you don't want, or what you would be unhappy about if you knew that that's what was going to be offered. So will you be treated by a female doctor? Now, I noticed on the HVA website, a lot of the clinics will say a female doctor is available. But if you are, that isn't enough. You're going to need to have that conversation before you start saying, well, I want a female doctor and I want them throughout the treatment. If that's what you care about, I'm not judging it right or wrong. I'm just saying, if that's what you care about, that's a red line. If they cross that red line, you're going to be unhappy, almost whatever the outcome. You might want a clinic in a specific country, or you might not want a clinic in a specific country. One of the reasons being there are different regulations and laws. A good example, this little that little image I put there of a little scribe means tell a short story, because I love to tell short stories. I think you probably, if any of you listened to me before, you'll know that. So I was working with a patient who wanted to use donor eggs in another country, donor eggs in any country, but the country that she was thinking about that might have been ideal for her in terms of cost, success rates, and everything else was still having donors that were anonymous. And she felt very strongly that any child to be born from treatment should have the opportunity at least to know who their sperm donor was, their biological father, if you like. And so that was a red line for her. So it's important that you think about your wish list and your red lines before you start, because if you don't ask those questions, they're almost certainly not going to be brought up by the clinic, because the clinic has an element of a funnel about it, and they're not there to kind of second guess all of your desires or things you want to avoid. So let's talk a little bit about understanding ratings. This is the TripAdvisor versus fact part, ratings and reviews. Well, I think it comes down to this sort of trinity of important things. Numbers, how many reviews are there? It's the same if you go to a restaurant, by the way, or you look on Amazon. It's the same thing. You don't really trust reviews that only have one review. It just doesn't feel very credible. Are the reviews themselves credible? When you read it, do you go, oh, this just sounds someone who's a bit out of whack, or they seem very unhappy about a particular thing. So getting 1 star seems a bit harsh. It's their prerogative to give it 1 star, but is it a credible review? And then independence. You want to be absolutely sure that this is not some sort of fake review, or it's not being commissioned by somebody to improve the reviews. And there's been loads of published examples of books, Amazon products that have someone's basically paid for the reviews. So you want to be sure that that's not happening in the IVF world as well. So what are the different types of reviews you can get? Well, you can get customer satisfaction word of mouth. And I think that's great. I mean, if someone can tell you every single detail about a clinic, the good and the bad, that's gold dust. I'd prefer that they sent it in as an objective review, maybe to Fertility Mapper, somewhere like that, because that would be rich data to keep for the future. The only danger with this, it's one person, probably one treatment, and therefore it has that bias that we talked about before. So although they may be talking a lot of facts, the one review part might be the difficult part there. We talked about bulletin boards before, and they're going to give you maybe multiple biased reviews. Again, not saying bias is necessarily bad, but it is what it is. It means that they've got a particular agenda. And then things like Trustpilot, Google reviews, and even the HPA. The numbers might not be there, and so you should definitely check that. I'd certainly say with the HPA that's credible, because you have to fill in a proper form and submit it a particular way. So we know it's independent and credible. But the thing we have to remember about reviews is even if you have a reasonable number of reviews, are you getting the people who are particularly unhappy? So that's an important thing to consider. So I guess, you're probably getting the message by now that ratings and reviews today are maybe not the best way to rate clinics. Although, again, if you can get the numbers, you get the credibility, you get the independence, then it's getting more and more powerful. I already mentioned that independent one. The numbers are too low at the moment, but I really like the concept of having it patient-led. So I would say think of ratings not as arrows toward the clinic choice. So, someone says something good about a clinic, or someone says something bad about a clinic. You might have seen 9 out of 10 of your criteria for choosing a clinic have been ticked. Green light, I want to go to this clinic. And then there's one bad one, and it's something to do with a review or some other thing you've seen. I would say use that one bad one as a signpost towards a question that needs to be asked. So rather than use it just as a metric, you scored 9 out of 10, I'll choose you. You scored 2 out of 10, I won't choose you. Select your top 3 clinics that you want to think about, and then use the rating part to ask questions, because then you can work out what's credible and whether it's numerically relevant. Because if they say, yeah, we did have a problem with this for a while, but we sorted it out, that's the clinic being honest and giving you some real information. So I want to just use 2 examples to show you how you can be biased, because all of us as human beings, we all have biases, and it can really influence our thinking. And I want that important thing, I want you to keep that in mind, is that we all have a bias, not just the people you listen to, but you yourself. So if I showed you these 2 things, this was off Fertility Mapper, by the way. I won't say the name of the clinic. I don't think it's super relevant because it was the only review for that clinic. But that one, if I asked you to choose between these 2 clinics, so one's an HVA inspection rating, one's an HVA patient rating, one's this Fertility Mapper patient rating. I can't see a show of hands here, but I'm pretty sure that most of you would choose the clinic on the right. I know you would use loads of other parameters, but given those 2 pieces of information, I think people would choose that, 4 out of 5, whereas the other one's 2.3 out of 5. But as I said, the one on the left is one rating from one clinic. So it's only got a single rating so far. And I happen to know that clinic is pretty good. So I think that's biased towards that one rating. And then actually when you read the feedback, although I completely respect that person's feedback, and I'm sure it's very, very honest, and that's that person's experience of that particular clinic. But you could say, well, that was one bad event doesn't necessarily mean that the place is falling to bits. The one on the right, that particular clinic, I'm not going to say which one it was, it's got 4 out of 5 on its inspection rating, but actually was nearly closed down. So, ratings I won't say they can lie, but they can be quite misleading. So now let's move on to understanding results. Now, there's quite a lot of good resources out there. I put one at the bottom, a nice one from Fertility Road, where the chair of the HVA talks about success rates. Actually, most of those national registries have links on them as well, talking about understanding success rates. This is really, really important, because otherwise you will not be comparing apples and apples. So I'm going to give you, 2 clinics. I've made them up: Best Fertility, and one's called Better IVF. They're fake clinics. They don't exist, so don't try and look them up. And somebody's going, oh, which one should I go to? And I'm using just one example. I could give you tons of examples. So we go to their website and we see their pregnancy rate on their website. Best Fertility has 62%. Better IVF has 45%. Well, I'm pretty sure I know which one you'd be tempted to go to, or to call first, let's say, because that's what usually happens. You don't just go there. You think, oh, this is the one I'm going to put more energy into. But then if I told you that Better IVF reports ongoing clinical pregnancy per egg collection, so that's actually, after an ultrasound, we know there's an ongoing pregnancy, and it was per every time I did an egg collection, and it's 45%. Whereas Best Fertility reports, or at least on their website, is reporting biochemical pregnancy, so a urine test potentially per embryo transfer. Well, okay, we don't have enough data there to say which one is actually better, but one of them looks like it's better when it possibly isn't. So I'm just using one example to say you have to compare apples and apples. So without going into the mathematics of it, that some of you may or may not remember, the kind of numerator, the thing on the top, and the denominator, the thing on the bottom, you have to have the same numerator and denominator to be talking about the same thing. So that's just one example of why we need to understand success rates properly. Otherwise, given that's one of the most important things people look at, otherwise we could be misled into, selecting the wrong or the inappropriate clinic for us. Does compliance matter? Compliance? Why are you talking about compliance? Well, I would say big fat yes, compliance does matter. And it's not always available in every country to get this kind of rich information. Why does it matter? Well, because if you don't comply with the local laws and regulations, there's a legal risk. So there could be risks to what happens in your treatment cycle. For example, if you had stuff stored and there was some legal problem, you might not be able to access that material for a while. I'm just, I'm making these, I'm speculating on particular reasons, but there's a reason why there are laws and regulations in place. Whether you like them or not, they need to be adhered to. It usually means there's more safety when people are more compliant, which is good for you and the staff working there, which means you'll get better treatment if the staff are well looked after. It means honesty and transparency. I'm guessing from all of the clients I've had so far, most people want to be dealt with in an honest and transparent manner. Well, if the clinic isn't compliant, that's a level of dishonesty. You might say, well, that's not towards the patient, that's towards the regulator or the law or whatever. But if you're going to cheat in one area, what would stop you from cheating in another area, would be my question. So it also means a level playing field. So I've visited some countries where, because there isn't really the same regulation as, let's say, we have in the UK, to some extent, I'm going to call it regulation with small r in the US and some other countries. In that particular country, you can walk in and they've got the success rate, the so-called success rate, kind of pinned on the wall. And it's not a level playing field because nobody's regulating that to say that's verified and validated data. So they can pretty much say what they want, which means it's not a level playing field because the clinic next door might be playing by the rules and will lose patients because they'll say, oh, this one's better because it has a higher success rate. How's it measured? Well, it varies, but it includes self-assessment, audit, and inspection. Where can I find the evidence? Well, it's country specific and can be tricky, but I showed you one earlier, actually. I mean, I'm going to use the UK as an example. You can choose a clinic, and on that clinic, you can actually say, let me look at the inspection rating. But I would say, don't just look at the rating, click beyond the rating, as I just explained in one of the previous slides, because 4 out of 5 doesn't necessarily mean, oh, that sounds good, that's 80% good, that's 4 stars out of 5 stars. It could mean there's a problem, and you need to, unfortunately, read beyond those stars. So this was from my previous coaching webinar, and I'm going to get through this stuff quite quickly because it's in the other webinar anyway. But I think what you're getting from my messages is, you have to tune this BS detector, excuse my French. So you have to be skeptical, and I want you to be skeptical even of what I say. This is a good mindset to have. Don't trust everything you read, don't trust everything you're told. Ask questions, sense check it. I use this other S, silence. When you ask a question and you get silence, usually means they don't have either a ready answer or even the right answer. Beware of contradicting information. I've got a story for that in a second. Body language. So that's why it's important to visit or have a Zoom call, because when you ask those difficult questions, you can watch the body language. You can watch the eyes go up. You can infer quite a lot about the body language, and it helps you to establish trust. And you're going to need trust to go through this journey with the clinic and with the doctors and the staff there. And trust your gut. If you feel like this doesn't feel the right place for you, whatever the ratings, go with that, because it's only going to bother you later if something does go not wrong but a little bit awry. You're going to say, oh, I wish I'd done what I thought in the first place. Beware of things that are free, because they're often just means they're included. Then they're not really free. You're paying for it somewhere in the line. If it's too good to be true, it probably isn't true. Oh, so the story is working with a patient who went to a particular clinic, and the doctor said, you need to have ICSI. And I said, okay, so what was the reason given for, I'm not second guessing it. I don't want to be someone's doctor and embryologist. I just want to help them find the answer. And he said, oh, because he had a borderline sperm result. And I thought, okay, reasonable, but not necessarily definitive. And then I said, well, what did the doctor say though? Because, it's usually embryologists who make those decisions on the day. And it was like, oh, the using conventional insemination, where you just let the sperm do their thing rather than inject them into the egg, has a 40% success rate compared to 60%, contradicting information. It's not even true. I looked at the website for that clinic, and it said quite rightly that the rate's very, very similar. So contradicting information you've got to watch out for. Financing and understanding costs. You need to plan for more than one cycle, even if you're lucky enough to have only one cycle and be successful. It might be worth speaking to a planner or an advisor. You absolutely must get a costed treatment plan. It's a requirement in the UK, but I would say wherever you go in the world, say, how much is this going to cost based on what you think I need? Because basic IVF versus fully loaded can be very, very different. Pursue funding if you're eligible and it's available. Consider multi-cycle packages and money-back plans. One of the reasons, I'm not selling them, I'm just saying one of the reasons is some of them have this kind of guarantee built in that if you're unsuccessful, you'll get some or all of the money back. That, to me, gives you a little bit of information. It gives you a bit of information about how likely you are to succeed. Because if you're absolutely unlikely to succeed, they wouldn't have put you onto that program. So that can be useful for some people. And then this is a question I had recently is, what can I do with the network I'm in? Because obviously a lot of the clinics are part of networks now. I've paid for more than one cycle, but I wasn't happy with the first cycle, but I've already paid for the second one. And I might want to go somewhere else, even within the same network. So ask those questions if you're facing that kind of situation. Query the add-ons. I mean, I believe in some of the add-ons, but I still think you should query them. Are they right for you? PGTA being an example, endometrial testing, all of these things, they're all considered add-ons. And you need to be absolutely sure they've not just been ticked. A box hasn't been ticked. You actually have had a conversation about why it's right for you. And another one that not every patient is told about is, buying medications from the pharmacy, not through the clinic itself, because some of the clinics are very open about putting a markup on it, for the convenience, and that's fine. But if you want to save some money, maybe you don't want that convenience. Maybe you're prepared to do a little bit of extra legwork yourself. And then I talked about personal boundaries earlier. I've written an article about this as well, so I think that's in the resources. So we'll spend, not too much time on this because we're running short, and I want to leave time for questions. But they come in all sorts of types and shapes and forms. And I think when I first wrote about this, I was thinking, personal boundaries. And I spoke to a patient I worked with as well, and she went, boundaries, what does that mean? And then we talked about it. She went, oh, yeah, okay. No, I didn't call them that, but I get it. So, what are you prepared to go through physically Financially, what's your budget? Where's your stopping point? Do you have ethical concerns? Who do you want to share your information with? Who do you want, as part of that inner circle to talk about your treatment? Are you going to put things on social media or not? Are you going to read social media during that treatment? So these are all things you can put in place. You can establish them before you start. And you can do it by doing a self-audit. Each of those types, you could rate it as 1 to 10. 1 being, oh, I feel terrible about it. 10 being, oh, I've got this. And anything that scores lower than 5, those could be the things you prioritize. You could then clearly communicate those boundaries to your friends, family, and the clinic, preferably in writing. Maintain them by looking after yourself, seeking support from a counselor or a coach if you need to. And you can do those at any time. It's better to do them before you start. But if you're in the middle of treatment right now, why not think about putting those in place? And be firm about them. They're there for a reason, but be flexible. If things change, then you can change your boundaries. They're yours. So planning your campaign. We're right near the end now. You need your wish list and red lines. You need to consider your budget and maybe get some financial planning and advice about that. You need to consult all the available resources. You need to set your boundaries. And you need to think about your timeline, especially if working with a coach. And I've got a story for this. Cautionary tale. Most people I work with have already done at least 1 cycle. I haven't really met many people yet who haven't done a cycle yet. And that's fine. Except all the things I've said are still true, even if you're going for your first cycle. You just haven't been through the pain of it not working or you being unhappy yet. So if I meet them, it means it hasn't gone well so far. And we know that more than half of IVF cycles are going to fail. And so I'm a little concerned that people often seek help only when they feel they really need it. And I'm wondering whether maybe they need it, but they don't know it yet right at the beginning. So the cautionary tale is, working with a couple recently, and we're having, fantastic conversations about all sorts of different things, and it's all going along nicely, exactly as I would like it to in terms of, planning in the right order. And then right at the end of the call, that they said, "Oh, we might need to start treatment soon somewhere else." And I'm like, that's a good thing to say right at the beginning of the call. If we're going to set an agenda, let's cover that, because the last thing you want is to be making a quick decision about all of those things that are important to you. You want to have enough time to prepare for it. So, before you start, really important. And if you're feeling pressurized to do something quickly, that's the best time to start, putting in all of these, not barriers, but measures to make sure you're getting what you really want and what you really need. So here's my selected resources. I've mentioned them all along the way, so nothing's new there. And we can always put that in the chat if you need it, or you can watch it on catch up. And so what might your next steps be? Well, I hope that you don't need to work with me or any other coach. But if you did, and you wanted to go through some of this stuff in more detail and specific to you, I do offer a free 45-minute fertility coaching session, which can be about literally anything. And often it's about choosing a clinic, but obviously it can be about anything because it's specific to you. But there are many coaches available, and all I would say is just make sure you get the support you need. It may not be me. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine. But I would argue you've got nothing to lose if you reach out to somebody and you get a free session to talk about whatever you want. And there's my contact details. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you so much indeed, Alan. As always, it was a great presentation. I'm glad that you've explained this perfectly from my perspective. So thanks a lot for your input here. I believe that it was very, very useful. And as you know, now it's time for your questions. So if you have any, don't hesitate and ask Alan. He's the expert, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help you out with any questions that you might have. The first one is not actually a question, but it's a thank you. So let me just show you. It's the question here. So I want to ask about shipping frozen eggs abroad. Are the eggs usually okay, or is it problematic? I live in the US. Any tips on where to go?
Okay, so that's a great question. I'm going to answer in reverse order. So first thing, any tips on where to go? I don't give recommendations, and I don't give rejections. So if you worked with me, I wouldn't say, "Oh, you should go here." That's not independent, and I wouldn't say definitely don't go there. What I would do is, if you had done the homework with assistance from me, I'd say, "Where are you thinking about?" And if it was a good choice, based on what I know, which isn't everything. I can't be on top of everything all the time. I'd say that sounds reasonable. It sounds like you've done your homework. If it was definitely a bad choice, like I just heard that place was shutting down or something, I'd say, why don't you reconsider? So that's to address your what should I do? Where should I go? I can't give you the right answer, not just because it's wrong for me to do that, but I can't because I don't know every possible option that you have. But let's address the first bit. So I want to ship frozen eggs abroad. Are the eggs usually okay, or is it problematic? Well, shipping anything abroad is tricky and difficult, and when it's something as sensitive as eggs or embryos, it's even more so. But the good news is this sort of stuff has been done for decades now, and it's very, very safe, and it's done all the time. So I don't think you should, I don't think you should worry about that. But what would I do in terms of asking the right questions? I would, work with a courier or the clinic's suggestion for a courier that has done this hundreds or thousands of times, that's reputable, that has good ratings. I'd make sure that I'm working with, a reputable clinic and courier. So that's really important. And if it's part of a place that has an egg bank, for example, a lot of egg banking involves shipping frozen eggs. So, that's part of the deal when you're working with egg donation and frozen eggs in particular. So I know I couldn't answer your question exactly, but you're going to have to do some homework is the answer. But it is safe to do it.
Yeah, thank you for the reassurance for sure. Thank you for your question. I do believe it was useful for you. So don't get discouraged. As Alan mentioned, this is safe. So if you have any questions, go ahead, type this in. And let's have a look. There is another here question. Great talk, Alan. I missed the beginning. Do you still do clinical work? And if yes, does this conflict your consultancy work?
No, so I'm happy to say. I mean, I'm sad to say I don't do clinical work anymore because it's it's fun and it's great being directly involved. But no, I no longer do clinical work, so I don't have any conflict with this. And that's the point. I can't be independent if I'm working in a particular clinic because I'd want to be. Well, the clinic would probably want me to refer people to that clinic. So I'm completely independent. I'm trying to use my years of experience and expertise to give people the best recommendations in terms of what to do, not where to go, and advice on how to approach it. And often it's about people have already done quite a lot of things already, as I said, and that's not a problem. And then kind of picking through that and seeing what could be done differently in the future. So yeah, there is no conflict at the moment, and I don't intend to do clinical work again. I think I'm a bit too old now to do that. So.
I get it, of course. Thank you so much.
Leave it to the young ones. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you so much for your question. And someone is typing, so we just need to give it a minute and see what kind of question it is. And here in the meantime, we can have a look. Thank you for this information. It's very good and relevant talk. We'll watch the recording later. And of course, it will be available tomorrow on our YouTube channel, but also on our website, My IVF Answers. So let's have a look. Next question from Rebecca here. So is PGTA, this is, I'm sure, your question, Alan. So is PGTA considered safe?
Okay, great question. I mean, that is a very, very loaded question, and it looks simple, but it's actually it's got many, many layers, that question. So I would say overall, PGTA can be safe. It can be done safely. Like any procedure, particularly one that involves a biopsy, because it's taking some cells from the embryo, can it be detrimental or harmful? Yes. The evidence that we have from papers and from experience of clinics doing it routinely is that it does seem to be safe. The biggest, so I'm getting into a lot of detail here. So there's different elements of safety. One is potential harm to the embryo, and the fact that you have to freeze the embryo as well. So PGTA is not usually done in a fresh cycle anymore, which could have benefits but could have negatives as well. So there's a freezing step that's involved. That's one side. So there's the mechanical, physical part. There's also the fact that when you do PGTA, the idea is to select so-called normal embryos and deselect so-called abnormal embryos. But if there's any chance that a so-called abnormal embryo is actually normal, then you've potentially thrown away the chance of a normal embryo, which could lead to a healthy live birth. So that's been where most of the controversy has lain around PGTA. So that question safe can refer to, is it safe to do it when I might throw an embryo away? And then the answer would be, well, sometimes it's not safe. But overall, in the centres that are using it, who are doing it properly, have the right staff training, using it for the right indications, it does seem to be shortening the time to pregnancy and improving the pregnancy rate per embryo transfer. So there are benefits to it, but there are definitely, as your question suggests, there are potential downsides. And that's why anybody considering it needs to not just tick a box, but have a conversation about it. And it happens to be my specialist subject. But I promise you, every patient I speak to, I'm going to be speaking to on Thursday about PGTA. You would think that because, that's my area of expertise, that I would say, oh, do it. No, I always have a conversation and say, what are the factors that you need to consider for you, why it might be good or might not be good for you? So there's loads more to that answer, but I have to stop there.
Sure. Thank you so much indeed. And if I just may ask about, what about non-invasive PGTA? Anything you can add on this?
I think this is another thing that I'm involved with. So, I have a bit of a bias, but again, I'm going to try and be balanced. I think it's definitely something that will, there's no question in my mind that technology is going to improve in the future such that probably all PGTA-like activity will be done non-invasively. I don't think we're quite there yet. And for the same reasons as I said about the potential harm, potential harm often happens in terms of mechanical, physical harm because people aren't trained enough or they still haven't learned the best way to do it. You can't harm an embryo by doing non-invasive, but you can not get a result. And that's where the learning needs to be at the moment. The other thing to say about it is it probably should be used as a prioritization tool rather than a selection or deselection, which might turn out to be a good thing, because if one of the negatives about PGTA historically has been potentially throwing away a normal embryo because you called it abnormal, if we now move to a model where we say, this is the embryo that has the most chance of being normal, so we should transfer it first. This one has the least chance of being normal, so we should transfer it last, or maybe not have to transfer it at all, then we never throw an embryo away, potentially. So that's where its value might come in the future. Now, it's already happening clinically around the world, but it hasn't taken off. It hasn't displaced invasive PGTA where you do the biopsy so far.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much indeed for that. And Rebecca, I would like to say thanks as well. Okay, next question from Polona here. What do you think about IVF clinics North Cyprus? Anything you can advise here?
Okay, there are, just to throw this out there, there's about 5,000 clinics or more worldwide. So but I'm going to give you some tips on what to do next, okay? I can't tell you about the clinics in North Cyprus. I wouldn't, and I couldn't. So what I'm going to say instead is, when you do a Google search, I would definitely do a Google search to say, because something is creeping in the back of my mind here, by the way, but this is just complete randomness and just chance. I understand something happened in Cyprus recently that was some sort of scandal. So I would definitely, that's on my radar screen. I'd definitely be doing a Google search to see if anything bad has happened in North Cyprus recently. However, I know embryologists and clinics in North Cyprus from the past who are perfectly good. So I can't make some sweeping statement about are they good or bad. But if you were going to go to any country, you might want to do a search to try and find out if anything, weird has happened there recently, regulatory change, scandal, anything else. And then probably what I would do is go to all of their websites. I would try and get a virtual consult with them and do that kind of, use the BS detector, see if I detect anything wrong. I think you might find something on one of those international curated platforms like Fertility Road has. I don't know for sure whether it's got anything on North Cyprus, but it might have, and that might be quite useful because it will have a number of different reviews and other features. But yeah, I'm afraid I can't make a sort of sweeping statement about North Cyprus easily without knowing all of those clinics. And even knowing those clinics, I can't know what's going on inside them every day. This does kind of highlight this thing that I said, though. I don't want to be, like I say, UK centric or anything else, but one of the strengths of a country where there's, a regulator, verified data sets, and all that sort of stuff is you don't have to ask the question, what are the clinics like in that country? Instead, you can say, I'm pretty sure they're all pretty good, and now I'm going to choose which one I want from that country. So unless you've got a very strong reason to go to that country, maybe you want to consider that.
Yep. Okay, sounds great. Again, I guess as well. Thank you so much. I hope that helped. Let's have a look. Again, someone is typing, so let's give it a second and see if we have more questions. If not, we will be finishing, but don't worry, it's been recorded. You will have a chance to re-watch it if needed. And you can also take a look at some of our previous webinars with Alan as well. And of course, I'm sure it's going to be helpful for you if you haven't seen them yet, obviously. And again, let's give it a second. Someone is typing and there is a answer. And thank you for Alan for the play. Yeah, thank you so much.
There's still someone typing.
Yeah, let's give it a minute. Let's make sure that we've answered all of your questions. But of course, as Alan mentioned, Alan, perhaps you can put your email address in the chat as well. So if anyone would like to reach out, they can do it. I know that it was on the presentation, but just in case you can put it in the chat.
Just makes it easier, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's my point. So let's do that. And let's see. Yep. Thank you so much. And I'm just waiting again. Someone is still typing, I guess. So perhaps it's a question. Yep. Let's see. There are actually two in the meantime. So let's see. So is nucleus transplant into donor oocyte and its success rate too good to be true?
Okay, so let's start with that one. I mean, that's a very multi-layered question as well. I would say it's not done in many centers. And so it's not really a question of too good to be true. I think it would be very difficult to access this this treatment would be my main comment. But if you were considering it and you had a good reason to consider it, then given that there's so few clinics that do it, it will be something where you want to ask a ton of questions. Because I also imagine it's very expensive. Anything that involves donor oocytes is usually expensive. Anything that involves very sophisticated micromanipulation, that's where you're injecting a nucleus, that's going to be expensive too. So given that this is going to be a very expensive and treatment that's done in very few clinics and relatively infrequently, you're going to need a raft of questions to ask to give yourself confidence that it's the right thing for you.
Okay, crystal clear. Again, thank you so much. And one more question, actually, it's a follow-up from Christina, right? So in the Netherlands, we have a problem with age, and in Cyprus, we can go there up until 55. That's why we have a big problem with choosing.
Okay, so I guess all I would say there, I don't have in my right in the top of my memory bank what the different age limits, because I think that's what you're talking about, age limits for treatment are in different countries. But I would definitely you may have already done this, but I would do a bigger search to see whether there are other places that have an equally longer age extension. And I would even consider, unless you're absolutely sure that a particular country doesn't treat up to the age of 55, I would look for a clinic that let's say it was the UK, for example. Unless you found in the regulation that you absolutely can't, it's something that I would definitely contact a few clinics and say, would you consider this on an individual basis, that sort of thing.
Of course. Thank you so much.
So unless it's against the law, there is discretion allowed in some countries.
True. Okay. Thank you so much indeed. Let's yeah, it's Greece, I guess, right? Because I think that they changed the law also in Greece. It was I think 51, but now I think that they extended this to 55. I'm not 100% sure, but it's possible, right? In such case. So look it up, and best of luck for sure, Christina. Thank you so much indeed. And I believe that was our final question. And as I've mentioned, if you have any more, then Greece is 54. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. We learn every day, right? So thank you so much for that as well. And there's a thank you from Christina. Alan, as always, thank you so much for joining. Anything else you wish to add before we finish?
Well, I mean, I don't mean this in that sort of pathetic way, but thank you everyone for turning up today, because it shows that you're interested and you're prepared to do your research before you move forward in your treatment. And I think that's really good.
Definitely. Thank you so much indeed for joining. And also, I want to mention that we will be back next week on Tuesday. We will talk about ERA test, ER map. So if this is something that you find interesting, join us. Dr. Laura Garcia will be with us from Clinica Tambores. I hope you will be able to be there. And there are plenty more webinars coming up. So stay tuned, register, and we are here to educate you. We have the webinar scheduled almost till the end of December. So stay tuned. Thank you, Alan. I do believe that we will have some more options to meet again. So thank you so much for joining. It was great to have you back. And everyone, thank you for joining, for staying, and looking forward to seeing you soon as well. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.